Hello, everybody, and welcome to our weekly lifecycle provisioning technical work group for OPI. I didn't publish any agenda items because I wanted this kind of to be, after a break we took last week, I wanted this to be a very open discussion on where we want to, what do we want to talk before. I was kind of driving an agenda before, and I just wanted for people to kind of comment. What is a focus and interest from different people perspective? I know, Reza, you've been very much focused on the boot coordination, reboot, and stuff like that. That's obviously one topic that we can discuss and try to drive into the conclusion and finally choose one of the three options that we have in mind. We also have a proposal for reboot and graceful shutdown coordination as well. And other topics, as we touched last week with Summer on ARM certification, secure boot, and trusted firmwares. So feel free to unmute yourself, propose the next topics, and then we can deep dive into the discussion. What is this group participants and companies interested in seeing, like, prioritized and finished quickly?
Boris, I think we also discussed some bias tables and requirements for OPI in this area.
Yep, thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Boris, for mentioning the boot initialization. Certainly would like to give some priority to that.
Can I ask a high-level question? If and I got asked this a couple of times and I don't know the answer. Has there been a discussion on a deliverable in terms of a specification or a timeline that this group or OPI is shooting for? Like these topics that we are discussing, once conclusions, let's say, are some of them are more urgent than others, and there are conclusions. Is there a specification or a goal for a specification, and at what timeline?
We haven't defined a timeline as far as I know, and we have both Stephen and Dan Daly representing the technical steering committee. So we can definitely try to escalate and try for them to kind of define the timelines that we're looking at. So far, we've been focusing on the technical discussions, how we do the specification, how we do the coordination, how we do the monitoring, lifecycle provisioning, all that stuff, without having any deliverables well defined yet. Good question, Summer.
Okay, thanks.
On the initial bootstrapping provisioning, we did produce a reference implementation code based on secure zero-touch provisioning specification RFC, and we published it and manage it in GitHub. So there is an agent that people can download and run it inside their DPUs and APUs, or switches or servers, whatever, and onboard the system using SZTP secure zero-touch provisioning protocol with existing open source or closed source Bootstrap servers. So that's already kind of having code and ecosystem CI/CD pipelines developed and established for that. Beyond that, I'm not aware of any timelines, as we said. For those who just joining, we are discussing the prioritization. People, different companies, different people suggested different priorities, and we kind of open the floor for a very free discussion here. Feel free to unmute yourselves and say, from all the topics that we've been discussing for the past year, like, what is the most urgent for you? Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think what I've heard people say about what they want from OPI, especially in provisioning, is they just want a consistent way for us to provision different types of devices across multiple vendors. So I think that we have a really great start with the SCTP stuff that we've done, but I think that we need to take that a little farther to have. I like the idea of a specification. I also like the idea of, maybe it's testing. I think that some of the test companies have brought up this idea as well, to be able to bring up a system, maybe interop and validate in our OPI lab that these systems can be brought up with the standard procedures that we defined.
In that specific space, Dan, good question. In that specific space, we are lacking actual coders, right? We created a reference implementation for ZTP client that can run on DPUs and IPUs. And we are lacking several features. We have issues and backlogs, and nobody's working on this actively. So we are looking into coders to contribute into this repository. In addition to what you said, is integration and testing companies that can contribute the end-to-end integration testing and validation, as well as create some demos that to show this is how it works.
Maybe an alternate path is to work with existing communities instead of creating yet another tool. What I mean by that is if you have the zero touch provisioning repo and you say everyone take this path, it's not going to necessarily fit into everyone's models or everyone's way of doing running their business, basically. So maybe the path forward is to build collaboration across communities and try and get other communities to work and collaborate together to achieve the overall ends that are desired, which I think for some people, it seems like they just want an API that they can use on the local machine to program the card however they feel they need to. But then if you look at the other side of the use cases that people are coming up with it's I need to be able to do this hyper specific, highly customized thing, which really means they need to be able to have their own custom OS in the card and do all sorts of other things too. So it's like,
so
there's no, I think the challenge is there's such a wide swath that no one single thing is going to be able to do it.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned two different things, and I want to comment on those two differences. So first of all, engagement with other communities, it's a good point. So we already reached out to Sonic community. Sonic today provides a classic zero-touch provisioning, and they added a little bit more security around the artifact signing, but they are not following secure zero-touch provisioning spec. So SZTP work that we're doing is extremely well aligned with Sonic. So we hope that we can collaborate with Sonic community, specifically in the ONI space, in order to adopt the secure zero-touch provisioning spec and start co-developing that, if that makes sense. That's number one.
What's number two before I respond to number one?
The number two is you mentioned that some customers don't want zero touch, and they just want us to expose APIs and manage those APIs from their management system, which is an extremely valid point. So we had discussed two approaches. First is adopting Redfish or creating the gRPC APIs to doing so. So far, we've been only successful to providing an inventory common gRPC, both the protobuf definition and the SMBIOS bridge translation for all the participating DPU vendors. And we didn't start the work on additional protobuf definitions in addition to the basic inventory.
It feels like we need data center operations engineers to come into this discussion. to answer, so they can answer the question of how do they have to actually complete their job at the end of the day with the frameworks they have and the policies and procedures they live within. Because I think we can create standards, we can create protocols all day long, but if they can't actually move to adopt those because they are just on the receiving end, they're not software, they're the ones racking, stacking, and executing process. So it's kind of like there's a disjointed gap here we need to
I don't
address,
agree.
I guess.
I don't agree because everything that we do currently is well aligned with our customers. So both of those methods for secure zero-touch provisioning and the API definitions, either gRPC or Redfish, is extremely aligned with customers and the way they deploy it, rack and stack, and they use and integrate in their management systems. So it's not that we are jointly working. We have a concrete defined goals, and we're moving into those directions combined and jointly from the conversations we had with customers and partners.
I guess my experience has been that when you have customers saying, I want Redfish, or Redfish will solve all this, they don't actually know what people are doing in the data center. And this sounds very grim, but the reality, at least that I've been exposed to over the last 10 years, is that people in data centers end up taking different paths because the tools are limited or tools only solve part of the challenge. And you address the entire suite of needs. So this, just to focus on, say, Redfish will solve this, or Redfish is the path, it doesn't necessarily address the rest of the process they need to execute, or that they need to be within compliance to, which may ultimately block the ability to do, say, use Redfish, or they may have to use a specific tool. They may not be able to use that tool with that in that way.
Yeah, I agree
makes
with that.
sense.
I brought this up in the TSC. I said that, Sonic and Dash are successful because this is a user coming from the top down saying, build this and I'll buy it. And we have thus far in OPI come from the bottom up and are unable to close the loop as to whether or not we're solving the right problem. So, I think that we could use, I think some of our Sonic and Dash interaction could be useful to say, all right, well, Microsoft is the customer. Let's see if we can solve a particular part of the problem that they're trying to solve with Dash, or maybe try to solve the problem for when they take Dash from a smart switch to an IPU, DPU form factor. That is one type of customer, but I think that we need to go find other customers. I think there are a couple on the TSC even to come in and say, hey, this is my problem. If you solve this, I will buy it. So that we know that we're producing something that's useful. And if we don't have the coding teams or the person power to go and solve that problem, going out and working with different communities and building something out of existing pieces, I think that that's a great approach to take, even if all we're doing is writing a spec on how we got there.
So great comment, but I think it's irrelevant to this group because we have a use case group. Use case group is working with customers, partners, and I'm meeting with use case group leaders in order to get their feedback and then take it to this group to actually work on the technical details. So whether I agree with you then completely, but I think the structure is in place that TSC created is that we shouldn't on this call discuss a lot of use cases and customers, but we should just get an input from the use case group and work on the technical details.
So isn't that our answer then for our prioritization? It's just to say we have to punt it and say TSC and use case group, what are my priorities? What is the most important thing to work on first? Who's my users? Who's my customer, and what's my target?
Absolutely. And I don't think that these group members have a voice yet. So this is why I want to create this open forum today. And And here everybody like who don't join TSC calls or don't have a voice expressing that needs. For example, Reza was very vocal about prioritizing the boot synchronization, which is I can absolutely relate to that prioritization. And Daniel is looking into the standardization on the SMBIOS and DMI tables. And Summer was talking about standardization in the ARM space and the certifications and the boot, secure booting and all of that. And so far, we've been developing the secure zero-touch provisioning, both the spec, understanding and adoption and relevance to the DPUs and APUs, but also the source code. So we have a lot of streams going on. And if I remember correctly, Stephen suggested us to more focus or at least also explore the lifecycle aspect, which is firmware updates and reboots and stuff like that. So we created a page for that. So I feel that we are targeting a lot of different areas at the moment, and maybe jumping between those themes and focus areas is not really helping the entire effort. I feel that, for example, on boot synchronization, Reza, we kind of neglected it in the past 2-3 weeks instead of making progress. And I also don't feel that people making good progress offline. So just kind of waiting for this weekly meeting and kind of relying on me to create an agenda and drive this. And I would like maybe to switch into more passive role of just hosting the meeting and taking notes and everything, and let maybe other people drive it and in the areas that are more interested and more specialized. This is kind of my take on this work stream. Feel free, unmute yourself, comment your thoughts, suggestions.
I think Boris having a milestone to work towards is going to help drive priorities and get these topics closed. If there is no milestone for a specification or a roadmap for a specification to be published, these all seem to be like open-ended discussions that we can just keep revisiting. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think we need to have a clear direction, set milestone, and make sure that people have
how it will help. I don't know. I just like brainstorming. Like, let's say we have 1/1/24 is our target date to create specification for boot synchronization. How is it helping us? Who is actually actively working on creating specification for boot synchronization? We created 3 options with between HP, Dell, Intel. We created all the 3 options. We discussed them extensively. We now need to pick one, and that's it, right? There is nothing more that we can do, I feel, in that space. How having a date will help us?
No, not just the date. We have to have the task, the target. I don't necessarily think that boot synchronization on its own really moves the needle, but I think if we got that direction from the use case group or from the TSC as to what we want to work on, then we start to brainstorm here. And then we should probably give them we should set a date up for ourselves, given the fact that we have people who have committed to working on this. I mean, this, I don't know about you, but, for most of us, OPI is not our 100%, job description. So, I think that we need to be able to have something that we can bring back to our managers and say, all right, in OPI provisioning, we are going to figure out how to, consistently boot across these 4 vendors, right? So, and we need to we need these things to be contributed. So, how do I get people assigned to it? Like that's how we got progress on storage. It was very clear as to what we were trying to achieve.
So a couple of comments here. First of all, we met with TSC, and TSC clearly said to us that #1 priority is boot synchronization. If that changed, great. You as a TSC representative, Dan and Steven, you can go to Joe White and discuss it internally and go back to us and say prioritization changes. But the latest that I got from Joe is 100% continue and expedite the focus on boot synchronization. This is extremely needed and useful. That's #1. Second of all, from our executives, I think that both on the Dell side and HPE side, Reza, correct me if I'm kind of wrong in that space, we all feel that solving that problem is extremely needed for server integrators, system providers like Dell and HP. 100% false.
Yes, I do agree.
So I think that this answers all your questions. This is well-defined problem. This is receiving extreme focus from participating companies. This is aligned with TSC leadership, and we cannot get it done. So I just wonder what it takes for this group to close this, and then we can free our resources to talk about other topics. But we have this proposal for several months. We discussed it extensively, all 3 options. We also expanded it a little bit to reboot synchronization, graceful shutdowns in order to test the 3 options and the theories. And we can have a date. I don't really mind to having a date and work towards a goal, but I think that it's a very well understood problem that we cannot, as a group, conclude on.
So I can add here just a little bit from experience working in other industry standard groups. I think there needs just to be some direction. Are we going to publish a spec for every new problem we find? What's the format? Are we going to just have one spec? Are our specs going to be normative and requirements based, or are we also going to have guidance and illustrations and examples of the use cases? I think just starting the very first document or spec is out of void is part of the challenge here. For example, take boot synchronization. If let's say, based on the discussions that happened so far, if we just go and create a spec based on one of the proposals, we can go and then debate that actual spec.
In order to do that, we need to choose a solution. I agree with you. I don't mind debating the format, but we have this page. This is our spec. The spec shows 3 options. We need to choose one option, all agree on this, vote, and this is going to be our spec. We can then iterate on it and expand it to more use cases, but this has examples, this has sequence diagrams, this have pros and cons, this have a lot of things going on here, additional even possible optimizations going forward. So there is a room for spec 1.1, 1.2, whatever we call it, like next generation specs. So what will help us drive, you think, Summer? The format of the document? Or let's say we publish different spec for each new problem that we have. If we then combine them in a spec suite, that's fine by me.
Are we comfortable speccing the problem? So I feel like we have done some documents about the possible solutions to boot synchronization, but I don't think that, I I don't think that the problem has been very clearly defined or demonstrated, right? I think that can we start with that, is to make sure that okay, boot synchronization is important. We heard that from the TSC. I wasn't at that TSC meeting, so I'm not quite sure, but I think that we probably need a little bit more, if that's going to be the problem that we're going to try to solve first, and we're going to write a spec about it. We need to write about the problem statement a bit more. We need to assign someone to go and dive into that, or maybe even, you know, show this issue on an existing system if we have access to that.
I think we kind of exhausted this already then several times. We brought this in this group as well. There are recordings of this. We discussed very, very deeply on the why we need to solve this, what is the existing problem with boot synchronization, how the DPU takes a long time to boot and the server needs to wait until the DPU boots. And if some cards are better at this, that's fine, but we need to resolve it for most of the cards, the majority of the cards that we are talking here. If somebody is, you know, ASIC based, FPGA based, and doesn't need to load any software, that's fine. But if there is software involved, we need to wait. So I think the problem was discussed heavily, and it's a well-defined problem. And this is how we started.
No, I'm just asking for the spec. Can someone write that down? Like, we've discussed it here. Definitely, I agree with that.
Mhm.
But are we open to writing it down and clearly defining the problem space? And then
I think it's written down in this folder. If it's not clear, we can definitely take another shot and rewrite it or emphasize the problem. But I think this folder that I created for boot synchronization called boot, that I posted in the chat, I think it has all the information that we need. If it's not jumping directly, yeah, feel free to kind of emphasize this and we can work together on making the problem more clear. But I think that's the documentation issue, that's fine. But again, on the resolution issue of all three options that we discussed here, in-band PCI Express versus out-of-band versus driver ready check, we need to start closing on this pretty soon, because I think if we are approaching this problem, which is very well defined, and we are struggling with closing this, I feel that, or fear that any new problem that will come our way, we didn't create a good track record of solving this in the community way.
Yeah, I agree with that. What if we took the documentation that we have? What if we kind of, you know, tuned it up into like a white paper? So we're not making a spec, or we're not making any declarations, but we're saying, hey, here's the problem that we see, and you know, here is how it's addressed in different scenarios. And you know, if we can name names and say, you know, hey, in this solution it's solved this way, and in that solution it's solved a different way, would that be sufficient progress? Like if we tried to come up with some collateral that is I guess consumable by you know, a user of OPI, to say, okay, this is how I go about solving this problem.
I feel that if the user of OPI in this boot synchronization is Dell and HP, as well as, you know, Microsemi and Lenovo and others, right? But Dell and HP here on the call represent that. So we are the user. We want to reduce the amount of implementations that we created or want to avoid to create in order to handle each DPU vendor differently. This is what we have today. We all, as Dell and HP, we have several DPU vendors that we're working with on the boot synchronization space, and we kind of treat each DPU vendor differently, and this creates a lot of complexity. And we want to solve it for our sake in order to make a standard how we do the boot synchronization equally and implement it twice. So the output of this specific spec is going to be implementation in Dell and HP, both BIOS and board management controller, platform board management controller, as well as on all the DPU, IPU vendor sides. once in order to save all the complexity of implementing it differently for different vendors. So if Intel, for example, have a different solution than let's say AMD, it's not helping us. It's not helping us to write a white paper that Intel is the best DPU vendor out there, and they don't need any boot synchronization, or they need something, different protocol or different way of synchronizing versus, AMD and NVIDIA. It doesn't solve the problem. The problem is we want to have a single consistent way that any new startup company or big company that wants to produce a new DPUs, and also the existing DPU companies, can change and comply into this spec, so we can help each other to reduce amount of differentiation that we created ourselves, but by not having a standard or spec.
No, but I like where you're going with this, is to say, all right, well, let's write a document. I won't call it a white paper, I don't know, that is authored by Dell, HP, and other OEMs that we may have in OPI. I'm not sure. And they say, and we write the paper, we clearly specify the problem, and then we set the requirements on it, to be able to, have your DPU, IPU in these OEM systems. You must satisfy these conditions, and then we can maybe even in the same document put in the different vendor responses as to how we satisfy these conditions, and that would I hope would go, and as both of you, the user, satisfy your requirements. So treat it like, you're Microsoft now, right? And you're saying, if you, it's a little different. It's like, if you do this, not that I will buy it, but I will help you sell it, right? And I think that would close the loop, right? In terms of making sure that we have a clear problem and we're trying to steer all the vendors in the right direction. So I feel like that kind of document that is sort of self-contained as opposed to a markdown might be the thing that we need. And then we could give ourselves a date and, assign subsections and start to craft this document for this particular issue.
I'm trying to understand why markdown is not good enough for you. Then from that markdown, we can create a white paper, PDF, whatever format.
Yeah, markdown's fine. Yeah, we can write the document whatever language you want. Yeah.
But we have the markdown. Like, what's not working for you? We have three options. I feel that we're not making progress. We have three options. We need to choose one.
I think the issue is everyone has different audiences in mind. You have one audience that it's just the vendors that are reading these documents, where I think Dan's thinking something completely differently. And until we have a common audience context, I think we're going to go in circles.
But how customers will help us create this? They don't care which path we choose, as long as it's the same path for integrating DPUs and IPUs into the servers. And I'm okay rephrasing all of that and putting that, but I feel it's not getting us closer to choosing one of the three options that we created.
Yeah, I don't understand why we would have to choose one. Like, but I like the comment about the audience, is that,
if we don't choose one, we don't solve the initial problem that we created, that we as Dell, HP, and other server companies don't want to have more than one implementation for all the DPUs that we onboard, because it's extremely difficult effort for us, and we want to avoid that. We will not onboard DPUs if they're not compliant with this spec into our platforms. I think that's true both for Dell and HP from what I talked to Reza. So not choosing an option means we support multiple options, which means we support multiple implementations, which will not happen for Dell and HP.
Yeah, it's the effort to implement and validate multiple options is prohibitive. We just can't do them all. Even 2 is going to be a real challenge.
So, Reza and Boris, it sounds like we are talking about having a requirements specification, a requirements document, right? And we are asking that DPU vendors comply with those requirements, and picking one of those solutions or dictating that solution. At the end of the day, it needs to be spelled out as a requirement. So
Yeah, I think, and that's the objective, right? That's what I think, that's what Boris is asking us to hone in on, pick one of those 3 solutions, hone in on it, and let's move forward. And I think time is of the essence here, because if the solution that we adopt requires silicon change, then, we have to bear that in mind as well.
Absolutely. And then once we have a solution, we can rephrase all of that into the spec wording and format, change the messaging audience, rewrite it several times for different audiences, more deep dive, more high level, executive oriented, customer oriented, technical steering committee oriented, whatever we want. But we as a group need, first of all, to pick a solution. One. Not 2 options, not 3 options, 1 solution.
I would say though, and this has been my feedback on this, is that I think that the boot sequencing and these 3 solutions don't give you what you're asking for, which is to make it easier to, I mean, it solves one of the maybe 10 significant issues or differences between all these different implementations. So I feel like if that's what we want to do, is we want to create a spec to make it to, right size these 3-4 different vendors to make it easier to sell them through OEMs, then that should be its own team to go and solve that particular problem, which I think it will be awesome if we went and solved that here in OPI. So, and that would be value for everyone. But I think that is a different scope than what provisioning set out to do, right? Like I like that scope better, because it's like, all right, I have a user, like you said, it's the OEMs. I know the things I'm going to have to define, or going to have to potentially change the silicon vendors' solutions, or maybe even their silicon. I'm okay with that, right? And I think that we bring this to the TSC and say, hey, we want to go and solve this problem, right? It's likely not the same thing as like, how do you boot all these different solutions in a consistent way? It's likely more broad than that, but more impactful at the same time. So I think that we need to bring that, we need to have that clarity, because I think when we originally sent out provisioning, it wasn't to make the solve the OEM problem. It was to solve the programming problem.
I don't want to disagree with you, but I feel that we're going in circles. I already mentioned to you that this was a direction in TSC. If you want to take it to TSC and discuss it on TSC meeting, please do, right? By all means.
That's what I'm saying.
We've been working on this with the premise that this is important, priority number 1, we need to solve it, and we deep dive into the technical details of this, and we need to solve it. If TSC will come in the middle of our conversation and say, stop doing this, I'm not sure we will comply, because we're in the middle of this, but we would rather finish it and then focus on something else. But by all means, please talk to TSC, and if they want to change priority, by all means. But I don't want us to go back in circles and come back to the conversation if we need to do this or don't need to do this. We already decided we're doing this until further notice. So I would like us to postpone the conversation of questioning, if we need to do it, to maybe much later stage.
I'm not questioning that. I'm not questioning at all. No, I'm saying let's give it that explicit focus. I'm not saying that at all. No, I'm agreeing with you. This is the problem we should be working on. I'm saying that it is not the same, I guess, scope as this provisioning work group was started with, which was, hey, how do users provision a system? You know, how does your fleet management deal with these systems, right? That is a completely different problem than
And we spent on that problem that you're describing before you joined. We spent on this at least 6 months, and we came up with secure zero-touch provisioning spec and reference implementation. And we continue to work on Redfish versus gRPC protobuf definition in inventory and fleet management space. 100% agree with you. This is the next thing that we're going to solve. But this is also important, and we've been working on this for several months, and I want to close this so we all can free and stop talking about that and move on into the fleet management. But we need first to close this, because this, as Reza very true stated, this could lead into ASIC changes, and we need to be and make sure that if we publish the spec in the right format, at the right date, whatever you all feel comfortable with, and we vote on it, and DPU vendors realize they need to change their ASIC, at least it can be done as soon as possible and meet the next generation of ASICs.
Sorry, another high-level question. I've been looking at the charter and the policies of OPI, and I don't see, or maybe I can't find a clear way of decision-making flow. For example, in many industry standard bodies, you have voting, and every member company has.
Yes, we do voting. Yeah, we do voting. It's on one of the policies. I don't remember which one, but once this working group decides on a direction, we bring this into TSC, and TSC holds an official vote. This is what we did with OpenTelemetry adoption as a standard and secure zero-touch provisioning adoption as a standard. So once we have chosen one way of doing this, we will bring to TSC, we will describe the solution to them, and they will vote in yes or no, and this is how the adoption will happen. Hope
Okay,
that
so the voting is at the TSC level.
the voting is on the TSC level. We, as a work group, needs to agree on what we give TSC as a proposal, and they will vote yes, no.
So if the working group cannot reach consensus, is there voting within the working group?
We haven't defined it so far because we always had consensus, but yeah, if we have several, I don't know if we have several opinions, but we can also bring to TSC and vote there on 2 options that we can present. We can present pros, cons of 2 options or 3 options, and then let TSC decide and vote instead of yes, no, option number 1, 2, or 3. But from my experience with TSC, there are some TSC members who are not very technical, so I feel
you want the answer.
Yeah, we won't get the correct answer over there.
So based on this, may I suggest to do?
We can vote here if you want to. Yeah.
You don't have to call it formal voting or official voting, but maybe get a straw poll on those 3 proposals, and give people a week and see where everyone stands in terms of supporting. Maybe that helps making the decision here to show whether there is a momentum on a particular option.
Raza, any comments?
Yeah, I think going with a straw poll is a good first step or next step. I'm sure there's going to be lots more discussion, but at least we can see where the camps are.
And I support all 3 options, so I don't know why we need to pick one. I think if our solution can support all 3, so I'm supportive of whichever one that we want to do. If we want to say, okay, well, the OEMs are going to go and do this one, that's fine. So let's go for it.
Yeah, that may be true for Intel then, but I'm pretty sure it's not the case for other DPUs. that they strongly prefer one over the other.
Okay. Oh, that would be really good data to have. I'd love to find out.
So
Where
let's see, Intel is here. So we have Marvell representative Chetan, and we have Vipin, obviously from AMD. So I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on this as additional DPU representative in addition to Intel. Never works putting people on the spot.
No, Boris, I think, my take is that, we have to settle on one. The main reason we are having this conflict is because the changes are deep within the implementations and the trade-offs. And also, I think we're trying to have one solution that works for various market segments. So that is also splitting us. Like, for example, cloud deployments may be very different from what you and HPE is looking at. So there is this this conflict that we are running through, which is why multiple solutions exist and all that. Personally, I think anything that is more controllable and adjustable, like for example, if you talk about a cloud deployment, then the proposed mechanisms, among the proposed mechanisms, the one that has full control over the card works better, even though I don't have real BIOS or BMC integration with the host or anything like that. In fact, it's not even needed for cloud. Whereas if I were to take enterprise deployment, then that is highly desired. In fact, I don't want to deal with two devices as two intelligent separate entities that I need to work with. And so that my comment really is that if you were to pick a market segment, we will come with one alternative better than the other, and whatever the implications are, at least we can say, if not now, even if we come with a spec in 24, let's say that, like you were saying, Boris, when can we have products that are compliant with that is TBD. Because if I take a stance what Dan is saying, you don't need anything. You should just boot up and just comply with the PCI spec and be ready for the host within that specified time. Why do you need anything more than that? Versus like, okay, life is more complicated than that because I need to have my data path programs up and running and fully functional within certain period in order to transmit any packet whatsoever. So I'm sensing that if we were to narrow down the market segment, it will help create one alternative. And even if we were to create one, it's okay if people don't have complying products to it. We can say that, okay, so by so-and-so time, we will have something which is compliant. So it's always chicken and egg. Do you come with the spec first, or do you come with the product first? I mean, ideally, you should have products that are going along with spec, but here is where we are.
But Vipin, as you know, we do have product, right?
No. I'm not denying. We do have products that are shipping that implements different kinds of method.
Yes.
But not when I say we have products, as in I meant products that are complying with one implementation, and one implementation as in a consistent implementation, which is the ask here.
We have products, we have different implementations, and we would like to converge to a single implementation. This is what I'm saying.
Makes sense. So can we say that from HP Dell point of view, we want to double down on how many people are interested in making the enterprise / the on-prem use case for DPUs to be the most relevant, or something that we should work on, and we should come with one approach for that at least, because that seems to be your top interest, at least from the vendor point of view, or from a partner point of view, or from provider point of view.
NVIDIA very clearly stated they prefer option number 3. They think that everything boot coordination have to be using the platform BMC managed and not in-band and not driver check in UEFI or BIOS. So we had a very clear statement from them that their preference is out-of-band platform BMC management, as stated option number 3 in the document. and I would like other DPU vendors and server vendors to vote unofficially or give their opinion, so we can finally choose one option and go forward with it.
Yeah, let's go for it. I mean, if that's, if
Yeah.
that's the case, let's do it.
So flexibility is good, but I think at some point in the past, we've already, we did prefer the in-band PCIe mechanism as a preference. Just stating it here.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say out-of-band works better because it can handle some scenarios that are beyond this particular use case. So we, as a DPU vendor, I would not have to create two ways of doing things for private enterprise private cloud deployment versus the other use cases.
And then you state still, right, the Intel prefers all, can comply with all three options, and you don't have a preference.
That's right.
Reza, from HP perspective, you obviously proposed option number 1.
Yes, I proposed option number 1. The challenge with it is the time to implement, because it does require silicon change. I think the DOE method proposed by ARM is also very doable, but we may still have the issue of what happens when the software or the firmware on the ARM locks up. So, you know, maybe there are ways to mitigate that we need to consider, of course. And then the BMC method, you know, we could implement that as well. So not necessarily because I propose option number 1 means I have to stick to it, right? Willing to go with the consensus and ease of use and time to market as well. Those are all considerations for us.
Thanks, Reza. So what I would like to propose, and in kind of 2 minutes that we have left, is I can bring to TSC, request a time on the TSC meeting this week or next week, present what we have so far, discuss that we have 3 options. Each company can state what they prefer, something like that. Say that we are on the verge. We cannot produce any new information at this point, I believe, and we need to pick one of 3. And either TSC wants us to pick in our group, or they want to make a choice for themselves. But at least I want to kind of state the latest update to the TSC committee, what's happening, and maybe seek their guidance and facilitating the decision and holding an official vote. That makes sense to everybody, or objections?
Seems reasonable.
And then as an action item to this group would be to rework the entire markdown and make it more look like more spec-wise once we have a decision of one of the options. And people who work in standard committees, and some are obviously you as well, I rely on you, can help us with formatting and language and all of that to make this a real true spec, like spec. Okay. Sorry for kind of one-off today instead of discussing more technical, but I felt it's very important to open the floor and let people kind of express their thoughts and priorities and feelings. And we can meet next week and deep dive on this. I do encourage people to work offline as well. We have our markdown pages. If you feel policies are not good enough, if you feel that the language of markdown pages is not good enough, feel free to propose changes. This is how we work. So work offline more. Thank you. See you next week.